Welcome to the latest in our series of ENO Center for Transportation webinars. ENO is an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit think tank that shapes public debate on critical multimodal transportation issues and builds an innovative network of transportation professionals. I'm Marjorie Dickman, an ENO board member and Chief Government Affairs and Public Policy Officer at BlackBerry, where I oversee our worldwide government relations and technical standards operations. Backed by popular demand, thanks to your amazing feedback, ENO is excited to host Women at the Helm 2.0 with some of the transportation industry's leading women. I am excited to be joined again today by other women in the transportation C-suite for the second Women at the Helm webinar. On the panel today, we have Global Transportation Chief Executive at AECOM, Jennifer Aument, who leads over 14,000 professionals in their global transportation design business. And I'd also like to welcome President of the U.S. Advisory Services at WSP, Denise Roth, who leads their consulting practice and formerly served as Administrator of the General Services Administration. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes from ENO. You can enter questions in the box on the side of your screen at any time, and we will get to as many questions as possible. While we don't expect any technical issues, ENO has found that just exiting and rejoining the webinar tends to help any minor issues you may encounter. ENO's webinar series is complimentary. If you enjoy the webinars and are interested in supporting ENO's work, please check out the link in the chat box to donate or become a member. You can find a recording of the webinar on ENO's website, enotrans.org, and the recording will also be emailed to all registrants within a day. With that, thank you all again for being here and joining us for this exciting panel. The questions I ask today will be based on themes from questions that you, the audience, asked last time and we weren't able to get to, hence 2.0. So let's jump in. First question, ladies. Studies have shown that COVID-19 has significantly impacted women in the workforce. Considering how the labor force was growing in 2019, 2.3 million fewer women are now working now than would have been without the pandemic. We also know that women who leave the workforce can be at a disadvantage when returning, both in terms of seniority level and compensation. So how can women effectively re-enter the workforce? How can we continue to elevate women to higher positions? And how are your organizations innovating to address this challenge? Who'd like to kick us off?
Well, I guess I'll start. Sure. Well, first of all, great to be with both of you again, and thank you, ENO, for having us back and doing 2.0. One of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit is how I don't want to come out of the pandemic in the same way I went into it, just whatever that might be, right? I just feel like we've had this unique experience in our lives that is really has taught us a lot of things and challenged us in different ways. So whatever is coming out of the other side, we should expect it to be different. And I think the same is true here. We have learned some lessons as we look to increase the presence of women in general across the spectrum overall. One of the key parts was the fact that we have to be intentional, set goals, and be systematic in terms of both encouraging women, especially in the infrastructure space, and as well as in roles that are just not traditional for women, as well as creating an overall pipeline. So, and that's both creating the pathway of encouraging this industry overall, but also creating the network around people so that they can be successful. And I think I had a chance to talk last time about some of the programs that we have at WSP. One of them, I really have applauded what we call our GOLD program. And this is really sort of setting an intention of identifying individuals within the organization that are ready for leadership, that is a representative, diverse pool across our organization, and that are connected with really what we think of as sponsors, who are people that are giving them input in terms of where the opportunities are and making sure their names are included in appropriate roles that really could fit and suit them as well. But I really think being intentional is a key part. But I think really the opportunity for us today is, how do we do it different than what we did before? We have many ways in which we can invite women, invite people of color into areas that have not been traditional, and really this is the time to do it. And I think we've seen some investments in that regard as well.
Marjorie and Denise, I have to applaud the work that you do and that WSP does, and I have to say, and thank you, for the opportunity to continue this conversation with these fabulous women today, and for the fabulous attendees that we really encourage you to ask questions and engage this afternoon. I have to say, Marjorie, the statistics you share are just devastating. For those of us in the industry who have worked so hard to try to shift our diversity, it's just devastating to have taken a step back because of COVID. And while statistically it may feel like a step back, I think we have also, certainly at AECOM, realized how flexible we can be, the tools that we can offer our employees, and the ways that we can engage with our communities and our clients and our partners that can create a better environment for these women to come back in. At AECOM, we have an ecosystem where it's between your home, your office, wherever that is around the world, and your client. And we challenge our people leaders to work with their teams to say, how do you make that ecosystem work for you, so that we can create a broad environment that is flexible, that enables our employees to come back, that enables our employees to thrive in a flexible work environment, and making sure they have the technology tools to be able to do that. And another example of how we are rethinking our virtual and concrete and steel workplace is in some of our big cities like LA, we have put satellite offices in place, so that ecosystem, one of those offices might be much closer to your home than it was before the pandemic. So now you can come back and you can go and you can be there with your child at soccer, come back to your office space, go back to your home, trying to make that possible, so you have the technology tools to be flexible, and you also have the opportunities to engage in person with great flexibility across our offices around the world. So we've worked really hard to create that environment. But as we seek now to make up the lost ground during COVID and help women, and particularly women of color thrive in the workplace, for me, it's about going back to some of the basics that we know that works. And the first thing that I always talk about, and I talked about last time, is data, data, data. You don't succeed in things, you don't reach goals unless you measure them. And so making sure that you have data, making sure that you have diverse pools from which you draw for key positions. I was having a conversation just this afternoon with my team, and we were talking about one of our great technical leaders in the bridge space has decided to retire. And we said, well, we've got this guy coming up, he's perfect to take that role. And we said, wait, stop, let's take a step back. Let's make sure we have a pool. Let's make sure that we are capturing the full talent in that consideration of some of those positions. And so it's really going back to the basics and really making sure that we are deliberate in focusing on these areas. And then once we get people in, making sure we have an environment of flexibility that helps and support that helps women thrive.
That's great. Thank you, Denise and Jennifer, for sharing those compelling insights about how you look at these issues at both of your respective companies. So second question, as we look more broadly at the transportation industry today, women remain very underrepresented in the C-suite. For example, a 2019 study showed that women comprise 39% of the transit agency workforce, but only 3 transit agency CEOs were women. This lack of representation is even more significant for women of color. We discussed the word intentional. How can organizations be intentional about increasing representation of women in the C-suite, including women of color?
And do you want to start first?
Yeah, I want to get to this rhythm here a little bit. I think it goes to succession and career planning, right? And so, again, getting pretty deliberate. It's not something on the side. As part of your career planning, we certainly do this at AECOM, making sure that you recognize people in your organization who are positioned to succeed, and you build a career plan around that. You rotate them to different geographic areas or different functions. They get the skill set they do to be able to continue, they need to be able to continue to move up and take those more senior roles. And that doesn't happen by accident, right? It takes individuals who are focused on diversifying their experience and gaining the experience that they need, working with mentors to help move them up help them as they move up in their career. But it's also, as employers, it's the onus is on us. It doesn't just happen. You have to sit down and have that career planning session and say, here, it's a great pool of people that are the future talent of this organization. How do we make sure that we help build a path for them with the champions and mentors and support that they need, with the external involvement and activities that they need to really keep that holistic view, and with internal opportunities, how do we make sure we give them that rich mix of projects and opportunities so that they're prepared to then take that next step? And then, while you can do that in a programmatic way, as we all know, as women in the industry, I think we have an obligation too to make sure that we keep an eye out for what I call female fatigue, because what I found is that women work, they're on that path, and they deal with an extra set of challenges that perhaps you don't have as a male in a male-dominated industry, and that does wear on you after a while. And whether you're managing, work life with taking care of kids, or with aging parents, or whether you are facing microaggressions in the scenarios that you're operating in, there's a fatigue that comes with that. And so we see women veer off course. And so as women, we need to make sure we have the supportive forums in place, but also as individuals, we keep an eye out and help train our managers to keep an eye out for that critical point where that fatigue starts to wear down and they veer off that path. That's the place where we need to step in and have people who've been there and had that experience provide that support to help build that framework around them to keep them moving up that career path.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I really appreciate what you're pointing out there. And so something I will just add to that is also saying to people, especially women, young women that are earlier in their career who may or may not be clear on what their next steps are. I imagine still building those steps. I think it is really important for you to build systems around you and build the systems around each other, right? Even if it's not for you, it's for someone else. Know that the people that are your peers today will be your peers tomorrow. And so what are you learning from them? What are you sharing? And create your, even before you're fully on that formal succession plan, you can begin to create your path to that plan now and where you sit. If you do see someone that is in a role that you think you're interested in, taking time to ask them for coffee and really being deliberate about understanding who they are and how they got to where they are really does help. It really can help you see where are the aspects of your career that, hey, puts you right in line with where they are today, and where are some of the areas that you might want to explore now as you're trying to think about what your next steps are. Whether you're planning to be CEO or not, the reality is that you have the opportunity to lead in whatever space that you're in. And in order to do that, you should use the resources around you, as well as which are the people immediately around you, as well as those who are in your sphere that you can build and learn from as well. I really appreciate, and this sort of happened with our conversation last time, where Jennifer, you pointed out just real world scenarios in terms of there are aspects of how women come to work and face in work that is different from some of our male colleagues. It just is, whether it's right or wrong or it should be different. It is the way it is at this point. And so the real focus is how do you manage within where your current reality is, and then how do you change it for others going forward? So being active in that understanding and engaging others around you is something that you really can own and should own today.
And that's education too for our people leaders. mean, I just, you can, had a conversation with a male colleague who said, well, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And you sit there and say, you know what, that comment or that woman in this very male dominated industry still has faced things like this, little tiny little gestures, little comments, little, I mistook you for, the administrative assistant, which I laugh because I could never be as talented to take on the work that my administrative assistant, who's fabulous. But they missed, they asked me to get the coffee. They asked me to take notes, and those are very cliche examples. But helping your people leaders understand and helping your colleagues understand that the woman that has that coming at her has had that coming at her probably every single day for days and years and even decades. And you can't ignore the fact that that builds up over time, and you're just tired. You're just tired.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so how would you have that perspective if that's not what you've gone through in your career? So we have some education to do that's important, I think, there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, just with your administrator example, with my title as head of the General Services Administrator, I was actually an administrator. And so I regularly had that question of, oh, so whose administrator are you? Or, which part of the agency? You said you left the agency. Oh, that region. I know that region. There was this constant lack of expectation that I was leading this federal agency, right? Regardless of the 20-some years that I spent, which, people may or may not know, but ultimately our perception of the roles of women versus men and who would be in certain positions really is shaped by what we see as we grow and develop. And we don't know that those various biases are there. And so our ability to gently and kindly point it out, but point it out nonetheless, is what actually helps us be better and better as we move forward.
I think, Marjorie, one thing that I'd add to the CEO, sort of how do we get people in the C-suite? I think one of the things that I think our generation is doing a better job, I hope, is that we need to make it clear to our colleagues that are coming up behind us in our organizations and others that we don't know everything, right? I think that showing that vulnerability, showing that, listen, I've taken on a role, and I think I've said last time, I'm still relatively new at AECOM, much different business than where I've spent the last 16 years of my career. And so there's a lot that I have to learn and be able to be transparent about that, because I do think that some women more than men say I have to know everything to be in that role. So to be very transparent about the fact that you're in a state of learning as you've taken on different roles. Here's how you've come up to speed. Here's how you have brought a diversity of thinking to tackle problems. And I think that's an important message for us to show, because if you're coming up in an organization and the leader ahead of you says, I got this, I got all of this, no problem here, I know everything, that's not a very authentic kind of position to be, and it's not realistic. That's why as you get more and more and more senior, you have to have a diversity of skill sets and experience, with you to be able to take on increasingly difficult challenges. You don't do it all on your own. You don't know it all, right? And I think being clear and sort of leadership in action, being transparent about that, helps others understand, wait a minute, okay, so I don't actually have to have every single bit of expertise. I can come up and build a team around me. And I think that's something that is an obligation that we have as we continue to move forward in our careers.
I think that's incredibly important. And it leads us seamlessly into the next question. So by far, one of the most frequently asked questions in the last webinar centered around knowing our worth as women and growing in confidence as leaders. So how do you know when you're ready for a bigger role? How do you overcome, and something you've both described, imposter syndrome when you do move up? And if you could go back in time and give advice to yourself as you started to move up in your career, what would you say?
Yeah, I'll take this one first, Denise. But contrast instead of compare. That's my advice, right? So I've spent my whole career comparing. I have a different background. I've got a different education. I've got different this. I'm different that, or I'm not like this person. I don't have this same thing, this or that. Lean into the contrast part, right? What do I bring to the table that the rest of the people at the table don't have to bring to the table? Start that with your internal dialogue, and actually write it down if you need to, and say, here's how I'm different here's how I contrast with other people that could have this role. What am I bringing that they don't bring? And that forces you to recenter, to think, listen, yes, there are elements of this where I'm going to need support, where I'm going to need expertise. That's what a leader does. They bring in the expertise, right? But start the conversation in your head with, what am I bringing to the table that others want? And I think that just reframes the internal dialogue and helps to celebrate the difference. So you're not spending your whole career just comparing yourself. If, we all have different strengths to bring to the table. Compare, contrast, don't compare.
I talked about the same very thing last time. I've typically been the first woman of color, the youngest, the first woman throughout my career. And there wasn't a path that was outlined in terms of this is the way you do it, because there wasn't that person before. And so I did focus on what were those strengths that made me different from the other competitors. What were the pieces that I was bringing to the table that would mean that I would manage differently? Those were things I had to embrace early on. Oftentimes, this is definitely an effort of competing against yourself as much as anyone else. So the questions that you posed, Marjorie, were really are rooted in how that individual is perceiving themselves, imposter syndrome concepts, as well as knowing when you're ready. I think the real question is, what do I need to do because my time is here, right? Which is a whole different framing of that question. If there is an ambition that you have ultimately, what is it that you need to do to be there so that when the time comes, you can step forward? It may not be the case that you're successful, and it's not always about the success as much as actually competing in itself and going through the process and demonstrating that you're willing to push yourself forward and that you want to be noticed and heard. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, understanding those who are in those those that are in those seats that you are aiming towards, understanding what has made them really excel, and understanding for yourself what are the things that make you excel. As I pointed out, there really wasn't a path that really was outlined for me. So it really was about understanding how my strengths and my differences really helped me to stand out in the competitors pool. And the same, I think, is true for everyone from their different vantage points.
Yeah, and I love, Denise, how you're saying what do I want to get done. I think, the door that you're looking to go through, ultimately, you may have to try a few doors first, right? And I think appreciating that, and it leads you in unexpected places, but appreciating that each of those experiences widens your worldview and gives you that experience and enriches your career path, and allowing yourself to learn from those and not just look at them as, oh, but I need to be here, I need to be here. Take the time to figure out what do you want to get out of that moment and that experience. That's good advice, I think.
Sure.
Right. Those are spot on answers. And leads us into, so another frequently asked question in the last webinar, and it's something, Jennifer, that you actually raised in the green room right before this, speaking of transparency. So the question centered around the different expectations, often subconsciously put on women leaders. So how can corporate leadership and HR departments create an environment where women are truly valued and respected? In short, a world where words positively attributed to men, like ambitious, aggressive, hard-charging, and direct, are also positively attributed to women when they lead. How do we help the corporate world understand this, and any world understand this, and change for better?
When you
task, you go first with that one.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was thinking about when we talked about that was how there's always these moments where you're challenged, where people are, labeling you as different things. How do you take ownership of those words, right? And what if we actually labeled in a different way what aggressive meant, and had a campaign in which you show these women who have been successful and powerful and also labeled as aggressive? There are many who have walked in the footprint, walked before us, and whose steps we're walking in today, who have experienced those same aspects, or those same words and labels. And I think it's really changing the the paradigm and shifting the paradigm in terms of what those words mean and what those labels mean. I've started traveling again recently, and I was sharing with my husband how I forgot that experience where there's oftentimes, to be, we've been honest so long way, I'll be honest again, where I am perceived as being in the wrong place, right? Whether it's, I travel a lot, so I have a lot of miles. So I tend to be sort of the first in boarding on, on the airline or what have you. And there's generally this assumption of you're in the wrong place. And where I'm seated, you're in the wrong place, or the meetings I've gone to or offices I'm in, there's this sense at times that I'm in the wrong place. I think stepping into that and owning that moment of actually I'm not in the wrong place, or actually I am aggressive and that's okay. It might just be that paradigm shift. I don't know that I have that answer. I really like the question, but I think that that's how I would deal with it. I think that is how I deal with it, quite frankly.
Denise, side personal note, and someone listening to this knows me and says she's not going to tell the story out loud, but I had a moment about 2 years ago. I travel a lot as well, and where over the course of like a 2-month period of time, I had 3 separate individuals in 3 different countries asking me if I was a flight attendant, because I'm in transportation and I travel. I've got blonde hair, so what else would I be doing? And luckily, we have fearless flight attendants that are doing this critical mission work right now. So not to take that, but the fact that I could not, what other role would I be playing in transportation? Certainly not doing multi-million-dollar deals or anything silly like that. I'd be a flight attendant.
Right.
3 times in 2 months across 3 countries. So I did. So Marjorie, to more seriously to your question about how do we change the perception, I think ultimately, we can call these things out, and we can call it out when it happens to other, particularly more junior people, and say, let's not, what do we mean by that label? And we can be brave enough to do that, but ultimately just shift this perception. We have to lead by action. And that means, again, going back to the basics and getting more women in these leadership roles, making sure the pools are diverse, making sure we're measuring our success and setting those goals, and making sure that we're actually moving the curve when it comes to diversity for women and women of color particularly, because the only way that we're going to shift that label and shift that mentality and shift people thinking that the only possible role that a woman can have in transportation is a flight attendant is if we continue to build that pipeline and get women in these roles and see them succeed and thrive. And that will ultimately, we'll hopefully not have the same conversation 20 years from now that we're having today.
Yeah, you really just can't underestimate that point of who's at the table making decisions. We talk about that and we look at we set goals and look at our metrics in terms of how many women we have in certain technical positions and how many women we have in management. But those are relevant because those are the places where the decisions are made about who to hire, what the position calls for, what are the minimum qualifications, what are the expectations for performance, what are the other activities that actually matter that feed into success for this role. All of those aspects, their decisions are being made at various points along the way, and the greater diversity you have in that pipeline, the more and greater the diversity will be through your organization. Like addresses like, and is attracted to like, and we need to expand what we have in terms of the number of people and perspectives and personas that are making these decisions, and that ultimately will change the dynamics for all of our organizations.
Indeed. So go ahead. I see Jennifer. Did you want to say something else?
No, I was just looking at some of the questions. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was about to turn to some questions now. So from the audience, I am an African-American female who serves as chief of staff to the director at my DOT. My background is not engineering or planning, but rather in legislation and public affairs prior to the director at my DOT. Sorry about that. 1 second, folks.
I see it now.
While in the DOT, I oversaw the outdoor advertising program. As chief of staff, our second in command to the director, the chief deputy director often feels the need to either comment or correct what I say, or if I ask a question, will either validate it by saying that was a good question, restate the question I ask. If I understand your question, and attempt to respond, and even when the question was directed to someone else. How should I deal with this situation? I think you're describing a situation, by the way, someone restating our answer to the question and our solution to a problem. We've all been there throughout our careers. So let me get to the end of your question and direct it. Okay, so should I bring this to the attention of my leadership? And if so, how would I approach the discussion?
Well, one of the strategies I've used in there, and it's hard to, you have a personal relationship with your manager, and you have to think through that, you know, in an individualized way, I think. But one of the things that strategies that I've used that has been successful for the age-old, I make a comment and a guy makes the same comment and someone says, hey, great comment, do you know what I mean? Or that similar dynamic is I find an ally who's in the room, and this is something I've done in the past, and I've served as the ally in the past, where you see it happening to someone else and you call out and you say, hey, Denise, that was a great point that you've just made, or Denise, isn't that what, I think Denise actually mentioned that earlier, and that's a great point. Exactly. And so I think, you know, one strategy to do that is to set that up ahead of time and find someone who you trust to say, can you help me out here in a subtle way? That's one strategy. If you're in a more serious situation and you need to have a discussion with your people leader, I think that's or your manager, I think that's something that you have to look at on an individualized basis. You don't want to be in a environment where you're not showing the respect you deserve. But I think that more subtle way has been a strategy that has been successful for me. Denise, I don't know if you're.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what came to mind. Actually, I was thinking even with that individual directly, and having maybe a strategy is to have them actually work to have them as an ally, you know, going to them in advance to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to bring this up. I would appreciate if, you know, getting understanding where their perspective is and getting their buy-in, even to the point where you can say, you know, I don't know, Derek and I were talking beforehand, and here's where, in that way, it could diffuse. In fact, it could be something that individual doesn't realize that they're doing, but it also could diffuse them feeling the need to repeat you or to sort of take over or acquiesce to what you're saying, but rather be a partner in what you're saying, right? And so then a dynamic shift could potentially happen in that room where you're both speaking from the same plane. Obviously, you're going to have to continue to work closely together. So finding a way for that individual and you to both be able to move forward together might be a strategy as well to consider.
And Marjorie, I want to add to I agree with Denise wholeheartedly, and I want to add though as well that the comment about I'm a public affairs person, not an engineer, and I think one of the things, and we certainly celebrate this at AECOM, which is home to, I'm biased, but the best engineers in the world. But transportation is building a bridge is not what building a bridge was 100 years ago, right? The complexity on the commercial side, on the stakeholder side, on the technology side. In order to succeed in transportation, in order for us to rebuild this country and to have a transformational impact on other countries around the world, we have to have that diverse skill set and experience. It's not just engineers. We have to have the best engineers in the world, but we also need a whole diverse set of skill sets, particularly as we look at modern transportation solutions. So don't have that chip on your shoulder. If you do, make sure that you celebrate that contrast, what you bring to the table. It's a very critical part of building infrastructure. So don't be defensive about that.
And Jennifer, you actually just answered, I spoke to a question a good friend, colleague, Julie White, who's here in North Carolina, who was pointing out, sorry to jump in, Marjorie, but she pointed out that she didn't think that either of us are Ps. I'm not, and
I'm not
Jennifer,
either. No.
yeah,
I
yeah,
just, like any wise person, I surround myself with as many as I can. So,
right, right.
yeah.
Same here, same here. And as Jennifer was speaking to, the transportation industry is evolving overall, and we are actually getting to the point where we have computers on wheels, and really the overall question that we're finding ourselves answering more so is, how do you really get people to the places they need to be most successful, to live their lives in the way they need to be? And a lot of what we are managing through is really about that, and overcoming those challenges is really sort of her question, which you were just speaking to, Jennifer. So I just wanted to
I
make
was
that.
just talking to a client the other day about customer experience. And customer experience is we are working on geotechnical, we are working on customer experience and everything in the middle, right? The transportation industry, that's why it's so exciting to be in the industry at this time, right? It's just it's evolving, and it requires a diverse skill set to be successful now, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, and those of us who are non-engineers is really helping sort of build that big picture, right? Of what is it that our communities need from us, from these transportation platforms and those mobility platforms, and how can we marry the best of us in terms of that sort of public side of big picture with the engineering to deliver the best outcome.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I'll speak for, at BlackBerry on my team, we have the government affairs and public policy team is very unique. It's typically just a government relations team. Well, what we've done is put government relations and technical standards, so engineers and our government relations people, under one organization. And it works out phenomenally. Like you said, you need to bring diverse expertise, and having these smart engineers work with these smart government relations people. It's a 2 + 2 = 5 type of scenario. So I think everyone's being valued for their unique assets that they bring. There's another great question here. And the question is, how do you deal with people acting as a gatekeeper in your field? Do you still encounter that at your level? So ladies, how do you deal with something is clearly in your bailiwick, and the assignment or the responsibility is given to someone else, or someone else tries to take it, where they clearly don't have the skills to do so, but they try to anyway. How do you deal with that?
I don't know if I've seen that in a while, but one of the things that I think it has been always important for me, just personally through my career, is just being clear on what my intention was and what I wanted to be successful at, and really pushing forward with that. There are at times where you will encounter people who don't want you to be successful. I'll just say it plainly, for whatever reason, and those may exist, or it can be a perception. Whether it's true or not, I think what has always been important is, what is the path that I'm on, and how is it that I'm defining success for myself? And if that path is interrupted, then how do I overcome those obstacles? I'm not sure, and it sort of goes back to where we were talking about earlier, contrast and not compare. It's not so much that someone is a gatekeeper as much as, are you letting them be a gatekeeper? And that has always been my default of how I face the world in general. If there is an obstacle, how do I not allow for that obstacle to exist? There's many things in this world that we can't handle, or we can't control or manage, but for the things that we can, those are where our power sources are. And so for me, it's really understanding what are the things that I can control, and using that as my leverage to get to where I need to be. That's a bit abstract, but it really is something that has propelled me forward over my career and personal life, quite frankly.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a great answer, Denise. And I think focus on what you control. I would just echo that, and trying to find as much experience as you can. And I always found that people that worry so much about what other people are doing or not doing, focus on the experiences that you can gain and the new perspectives that you can gain. And I think that will serve you certainly well.
Yeah, I think those are great answers. At the same time, I want to validate this woman's question on, she's obviously facing, she is dealing with people acting as a gatekeeper. So my advice is keep pushing through. If something is in your bailiwick and you should have input into that, you have value add, be persistent, add your value, because you are valuable. Here's another great question, and I love it. It's from a man, and this is important because, you know, this webinar is not just for women. This webinar, as much as we have women on the panel and we talk about women and women, you know, moving the next steps. This is about, you know, like the real world. I mean, women and men, we work together. And this gentleman had a great question. How can your male colleagues support you better?
I always like that. I think it goes to the ally point that we were talking about earlier. There is a regular, I think it's March actually, Women's Recognition Month, where we will have various activities nationally as well as in our organization. And I think there's no better time than for men to stop at those moments and really express the women in their organizations that they value, that they lift up, that they celebrate. I think that that's very powerful. When we were talking earlier about who's making the decisions, there are many places and rooms in which we are not, even to this day. And it's going to be those male colleagues who acknowledge that and make the point of bringing us along, as well as creating the space that will be significant. We see that every day, and it's been those times in my career where I've had male colleagues really sort of stand up and stand beside me that have been important transitional moments. Is that the way it will be in the future? You know, that's why we all talk about looking behind and reaching back and pulling others up. But for male colleagues in particular, being that voice, especially where women aren't present, will be a significant role for you to play.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I would say get curious. I appreciate the question, but I would encourage you to pose that question to your colleagues and say, help me understand the experience that you have had, the experience. It could be scary because these are tough topics to talk about sometimes. But don't be scared of them, but get curious and ask your colleagues and ask the female members of your team, help me understand the challenges that you face so that you can better understand and you can play a role in educating your colleagues on the unique challenges that women face, and you can be an ally in helping to address them. And then also, again, going back to basics, make sure you have diversity in your hiring pools. Challenge yourself to do that. I had a session this morning with one of my favorite colleagues who's in Saudi Arabia. And we are doing a performance review, and I'm sure he loves that I'm talking about his performance review in front of all of these people. But one of the things I said, when my colleagues and I challenged him on how he was going to improve in the year ahead, one of the things he said is, I really need to get better about building diversity in those pools. He's like, we've not done enough, we've not gone far enough in making sure that we have that diversity of thought and we have enough gender diversity around the table here. And I just thought, oh, yes. And he's sitting in Saudi Arabia, and that's his personal goal for the year. So set those metrics and goals. Make sure your pools are diverse. Even if you're in Saudi Arabia and you can do it, you sure as I can do it in Ohio. Make sure you're setting those metrics, measuring those goals, measuring your team's success. Based on diversity. You measure every single thing you do that matters: safety, revenue, votes if you're on the political side, right? So polls, if you care about it, you measure it. So measure it and action it. But I love the question, and thanks for asking it.
Yeah. So another great question came in. What do each of you see as a key skill or knowledge for women to move into the C-suite? And a related question is, how do you suggest breaking a glass ceiling in a space that doesn't seem to value diversity?
Interesting. So what do we see as a key skill?
Yeah.
Gosh, that can.
So first, the key skill, then second, if you're in a situation that doesn't value diversity, what do you do?
I'm going to do something totally off left field, Denise. I'll start the conversation there because we haven't really covered this topic today. I don't think we covered it last time either.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, and I've learned this as I've gotten farther in my career, that is a key skill in order to be in that C-suite is endurance and persistence. And I think one of the secrets to success there is your mental and physical well-being. And as women, I don't want to own this just as our gender. Men don't do a good job either, but we often put ourselves last. We often put our health last. And as you move up and jobs get more intense in hours in travel, the lesson that I've learned certainly is you have to fuel your brain and your body to be able to succeed, to be able to do what you need to do in complex roles. And so, and in transportation in particular, that's why I love transportation. It is very complex. Those of us who work on projects, they're very hard. They twist and turn and they take forever to get done, and that requires that resilience and persistence to be able to make that happen. You have to prioritize wellness in order to fuel your body and your brain to do and manage that complexity. So I think that's how I'll answer that question today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that response. And in fact, I think I got better at that as I got older, partly out of necessity. Because the work ages you too, and you start to age faster. But appreciating the health of body in mind actually does make you perform or help you perform better is a really significant point. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward. Another piece I just will add to that, because I also found that I planned better and was better prepared by having all of those things in alignment, right? So in terms of getting clarity around what you want to achieve in that C-suite seat, and understanding the opportunity that you have is quite essential. And in order to do that, having that plan of what your success looks like, I think has been a key aspect too. But I definitely, my clarity was stronger with mind, body, and health being all in alignment.
For sure. And I'd add for women particularly, we have stereotypes of women, female type behavior, right? And for me personally, when I'm tired and I'm not well and I've not been taking care of myself, I just go right into that, right? I lose my temper, or I act emotional, or I do all the stereotypical types of things, and that's not helping our cause much, right? So I think that's another reason to focus with that priority.
Yeah, and I agree with these wholeheartedly. And and as women, as we see or hear other women going through these experiences, something where you're pushed to that place, another woman pushed to that place where is you talk about Jennifer, and your reaction and your your tiredness, you're not at your best, that we support each other. And that's very important as well. And it's important if you're a male colleague as well, and to be able to have that perspective. So a couple of questions we got are about mentorship. So, as C-suite executives, how should a more junior person approach you about mentorship? So, do you want to go first, or just ask?
Well, yeah. Just ask and be prepared. right? There's and how do you prepare? You know, if you're asking someone to, will they be your mentor? It does help to have spent some time thinking about what you're looking for. Even if you're not sure, going through the process of narrowing down really does help. You know, sort of identifying areas that you believe you want to explore, creating your own pros and cons gives you a basis upon which to start a dialogue with a sponsor or a mentor. So be active in those relationships. Definitely be proactive in terms of asking someone to be your mentor, but also understand what you're looking for. What is it that you want to achieve? And what do you think are your gaps and what do you think are your real strengths? And be prepared to talk about that. Come to the relationship actively.
Yeah, I would add as well, because we're all very busy and we have waves of time where we have more time to spend in those roles than in other times. And so when you approach someone and you say, listen, I'm looking for someone to help me work through some of these obstacles or help me think through my career and give you that support, or I'm looking for a champion, say, do you have time, or do you have someone in your network who you think would be a good match for me? And that leaves the opening too, is to be able to pair people up. And I know Denise would be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do it. Marjorie, I know you'd be happy to do that. Sometimes you don't have time personally, but you know someone that says, hey, I've got someone who'll be perfect for where you're at in your career and what you're noodling in your head right now. So I think that's another way to get connected.
Yeah. And then I'd say I'd make 2 points here. I mean, for someone who is guilty of taking on too many mentees, you know, I would reiterate to be active when you're, you know, seeking a mentor, and really know what you're looking for. And most women like ourselves will really try to help you. And if we can't, just because of time commitments, we probably know someone else who can. The other thing I'd say is, and this is confessing a little bit about myself, you know, but it goes back to what Denise and Jennifer, you were saying about women. We often put ourselves last, and it also goes to one of the questions about that I'm looking at from the audience: women taking on, you know, larger, you know, with families, caring for kids, parents, and then all these other responsibilities we have. We often we put ourselves last. We put our health last. So mentors for me, I put mentor way last, probably only until a couple years ago. And I'd say, you know, I should have done this many more years before, but only until a couple of years ago did I really start to think about a mentor for myself. So I do think it's a really valuable question. And I would say, you know, I wouldn't be where I am, you know, without the advice of these two wonderful people. But I'd say the question's really important to think early on, you know, what do I need help with? And really actively think about, where do I want to be stronger? And when you approach that mentor question, to think about it in that way. But do seek out mentors. There's nothing experience. There's a lot to be said for experience, and there's a lot of humility in experience, which I think we can all say. You become far more humble as you move up. You're a lot more honest with yourself about what you're strong, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then, you know, what to surround yourself by to ensure that you drive the best results for your organization or your company. So let's go on to, we're getting lots of questions here, which is fantastic. So let's see, I'm trying to group these together. Okay, a lot of hows. See keys, little knowledge. Okay, here's a really good one, which I'll hit home with. What do each of you see as a key skill or knowledge for women to not just move into the C-suite, but the board, WTS International, ASE, APT, etc.
Yeah. I would say
I think
diversity.
the answer to this is it differs. It's persistent, but it differs.
Well, no, I would say diversity of experience. I think that would be my biggest advice. And at AECOM, one of the things we just had a session the other day with our sort of iconic technical leads. These are the people that are just, build, transform cities and are absolute strongest technical talent. And that's the advice that they gave. And I took that to heart for people that are coming up in their career, is to get as much different kinds of experience as you can. I think that would be what I would advise. I still try to do that now. I hope that I'll continue to do that for 100 more years, but I think that's the advice, is to get as much exposure and a diversity of experience as you can. I think that best positions you for whatever that role is, and that's inside your organization, but also outside your organization. And sometimes in times of my career where I felt a little stalled or a little comfortable, I try to get a new challenge outside my organization, to make sure that I was getting exposed to new and different thinking and concepts and challenges. And so that's my advice on that front.
Yeah.
And just
Denise, before you jump in, I'll say really quickly, you just perfectly answered someone else's question, which was, do you feel outside your job experience, for example, in a private or not-for-profit board, in the training needed to be effective board members has helped you? And I think absolutely for all of us.
Yeah. That's right. And just to add to that, I was just going to say that also don't assume that experience has to come with a title. That there is experience you gain through influence, there is experience you gain from different organizations. I think oftentimes I talk with people who are thinking about, where their career paths will lead and whether they can move into a certain position or what have you. Don't underestimate your ability to learn and gain and to be effective through influence that has nothing to do with the title as well. And so that's another aspect of that.
That's a great point. So I think, and we have time for one last question. Thank you, by the way, audience, for so many of these amazing questions. As a successful woman, do you still find yourself in a situation where people in your field doubt you and somewhat make it like they want you to prove yourself before they trust your decision or advice? How do you deal with this?
Yeah, prove myself. That's how I deal with it. I think the answer is definitively yes. I suspect Denise will wholeheartedly agree. The advice I've given and the path I've taken is try to focus on what you bring to the table and show them how smart you are, and deliver. Being underestimated is a pretty cool thing, especially in a male-dominated industry, because when you walk in and they think you're getting the coffee, that's a great place from which to start a negotiation, right? So use that as an asset, and improve yourself. Show them what you got, and that's how you overcome that.
Yeah, and you will never stop being questioned, right? And it's not just because you're women, and part of it, it's also as you go up in the ranks, regardless, you will never stop being questioned. So focus on where your strengths are.
Glad the 20-year-old self, the 25-year-old self, you didn't know that, because I thought it would end at 30 or 26 or something, or 40, or I don't know when I thought it was going to end, but I thought it was going to end. So Marjorie, I might take a little, since this is a two-session panel, I might take a panelist liberty here a little bit. I know we just have a couple minutes left, and happy to take another question, but it is October, and it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I know we have a lot of females who have tuned in today, and a lot of men who are interested in protecting and supporting the females in their lives and on their teams. I hope you don't mind me sharing, but when I was on the 1.0 panel a few months ago, my phone was ringing very persistently during that entire panel. And so when I popped off the panel, I called back my doctor, and I got diagnosed with breast cancer during the last panel. And I've had surgeries and started my treatment since then. And So I want to encourage, I'm a relatively young woman and I was in great shape and did all my, so I really encourage everyone on this. Since I was diagnosed on the ENO 1.0, I want to use the ENO 2.0 to make sure that everyone on the call gets their proper screening so they're in best position, and also encourages the women in your team, on your teams, when you have your safety moments, make sure that you bring up Breast Cancer Awareness Month. More than 95% of people who get breast cancer don't have little or no family history. That's a big myth that's out there. So even if you don't have a family history, I hope that you'll get your screening, encourage the people in your lives, and use that as your safety moment this month as I'm working through that. And when we talk about flexibility and we talk about support and champions, AECOM, you know, what an employer, and their support of me as I'm going through this. But I do encourage people to make that their safety moment this month.
Jennifer, thank you
for that.
for sharing that with us. It's so important, and you certainly have our prayers. And that data point about most people, it doesn't run in their family is something I didn't know, and really important for all the women out there. Get tested, and for the men, support the women in your life to get tested. To close this, just thank you, Jennifer and Denise, for joining us again for 2.0. This has been as much fun, if not more fun, than 1.0, for sharing your thought leadership and your personal stories. And thank you to our audience for your active participation and your fabulous questions. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Eno. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.